1968 Chevy. Oh, I guess it's probably a quarter ton. Maybe it's the 3/4. I don't know. Might be the big boy. Some of the parts were heavy, some of the parts weren't. But that truck, you look at the pictures that I have scanned in here or taken pictures of. I was thinking about doing a fancy pants scan in and run through the whole deal, but I don't think that would be lining up with what kind of truck that was. That old Chevy, it was the funnest. It was the best vehicle we probably ever had, and it was a hunk of crap. It was a rat rod before rat rods were the thing. It was just a hunk of truck, hunk of junk, and it was so fun. Now, if you look at these pictures, each picture of itself is its own really great story. A couple buddies of mine going sledding, and you look at the saucer sled that they have, and you say, what the heck is that? All of that, how I got together with those guys, where we were sledding, and what that sled is its own story. And then Dad, being a ham bone, Dad had a pretty good sense of humor. I could tell a ton of stories about that motorcycle, that particular trip going out, riding in the winter, because I'm a pretty good old rider. I could ride in just about anything, or at least I did when I was a younger man. But that is its own story as well, and I could tell a story about how great Dad was with all my friends because everybody loved Dad. And years after I had moved away, my friends would still come over to Dad's to hang out with Dad and to see how he was doing. That's just the kind of fella he was. But the story of this truck starts with a 1963 four-door F-85 that didn't have a back seat. It actually had a beanbag chair in the back. It had a 331 with a whatever Oldsmobile's version was of the Power Glide 2-speed. One of the first cars I ever drove. And Dad got a hold of this because we were truck poor at the point. Dad had always had some mini truck of some type here or there. Now, the Chevy Love, 74 Chevy Love that I got in a lot of my videos, that cracked the block and blew the head. Dad had a pretty sweet little late 80s, early 90s Isuzu that was a 5-speed, but the motor broke on that. He rebuilt it himself and and promptly dropped the valve and rebuilt it again and sold it to a dealer for one of the most awful 80s, early 80s too, Monte Carlos you could ever have. And so we have all these vehicles. And none of them are trucks, and Dad kind of needs a truck. So Dad is driving the F-85 around with a beanbag chair in the back. I wish I had a picture of that vehicle because that thing has its own stories too. But Dad trades the F-85 to one of my buddies for the truck in this picture, or both of these pictures. And when we first got that thing, where do I start? So you think about all the carriage bolts that fasten a vehicle down. You got the 4 corners on the bed. You got the 4 corners, maybe 6 at some point on the cab, or a mix of all of those. There were no carriage bolts on the bed. There were 2 on the cab, and the bolts were just straight down with no nut on the back of them. Let's just start with that. The steering was terrible. Dad ended up taking a whole front end apart and redoing it. The motor, I could do a whole video on just the motor that we pulled out of it. It didn't have the right harmonic balancer on it. Now, the nice thing about it is, I still have it. It is a big, heavy casting 4-bolt main. I don't know if it's the real nice X casting kind of thing, but it'll make a good builder whenever I get around to building it. But the ring groove on this thing is the hardest ring groove I have ever seen on anything. We might have to sleeve that hole to get it cleaned up. But oh my goodness, I'm trying to order my thoughts with all the stories and all the craziness with this. So Dad redoes the front end. He kind of has a throw together motor that I helped him build it. We line honed it and the whole bit. He showed me how to use a stone hone, which was really fun. There's a lot of stuff I learned by doing that. Now, the reason why I said I'm not sure what size this truck was, all the suspension and everything didn't seem to be super heavy. It didn't seem to have the super heavy frame, but it did have, we called it the dump truck 4-speed, whereas a granny first gear, the sinkers weren't exactly in it real great, and it was a 4-speed, but it did have a 411 posi, well, not posi, but it had a 411 gear in it, and these great big old hard tires. And part of the reason why this is so fun, when Dad got it all put back together, there wasn't a corner in town that he or myself didn't take sideways in that thing, because it was just one of those trucks. I mean, you couldn't shift it hard from, across the gate from 2 to 3, but boy, you could get it in that good RPM band and bark them sideways. And man, what a fun vehicle. So the main part of the story that makes me smile about this is Dad has this just ring and bearing, line hone, throw together motor with parts. And so he's got all the pistons and all the holes. He doesn't have the heads on yet. And I'm in the house doing something. Dad comes into the house from the shop and says, "Hey, boy." And usually if he says, "Hey, boy," it is, "You're in trouble," or "Come look at this." And so he could be a little bit ornery, so I'm not sure exactly which "hey, boy" it was. He said, "Come out to the shed." We go out to the shed. And so when you put pistons in it, you got it all installed, you got the bottom end, everything's all buttoned up, you just got to finish assembling everything else. When you get that all together, they'll wiggle a little bit, especially if they're top dead center. And so Dad has taken me through these. He said, "Hey, feel this." And you kind of put your thumb on either side of the piston. One thumb is on the, toward the intake side. One thumb is toward the exhaust side. Boop, 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 kind of wiggling back and forth a little bit. And they were all kind of tight, kind of loose. And he said, "Hey, feel this one." And it rocked back and forth a lot. And I looked at him, my eyes were kind of big. I said, "Dad, that was a lot different than the other ones." He said, "Yeah, but we're never going to have this above 3,500 RPM anyways. Maybe $4,000 at the most, and it's not going to hurt it. He's just for a throw together motor, it'll be fine." And and later, Dad sold this, and the ending of this truck is actually a pretty good one. Dad sold this to a guy who restores vehicles. He's an amazing painter. I actually had, my first car was an 85 Cutlass, and that guy completely went through it. And that, with Dad and I always called that the parade car. But anyways, so Dad sold that to him, and the guy completely went through it. But he just run into Dad one time and said, "Hey, that old motor runs pretty good, but every once in a while it'll drop a cord. Did you ever have any problems with it?" And Dad didn't tell him. He says, "Oh, she just ran pretty good." And, on that loose cylinder, probably what happened is the ring gaps would line up every once in a while and probably push a little bit past the bore. But it was such a great vehicle. And it was kind of the start of what Dad and I always called the good days, where we didn't have show cars, we didn't have the best stuff, but everything ran pretty good, and it was all fun. So yeah, those are my stories about this truck, or just the truck itself. There's going to be more in the pipeline. Telling stories about Dad makes me happy, and to share this with you maybe reminds you of your stories too. And that's part of the reason why I like telling stories, for you to enjoy them, but also for you to remember your stories, because everybody has car stories, and to push those on to other people, pretty good deal. So I guess I don't know if I got anything to push. I'm always drawing comics about these stories. I'm probably going to have a comic eventually. I could probably do a whole series of comics just on this truck. I mean, it just have, I think we might have called it Old Whitey, but have a story series, Old Whitey, just about this old truck. But anyway, hang out when you can. I am getting ready to run some comics. Some pretty fun stuff is in the pipeline, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you later.